cloth mask or covering over your nose and mouth at all times, and remaining quiet so that everyone is able to hear the audience proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, officer. We're going to wait till exactly 6 p.m. to get the meeting started. Mrs. James, can you hear us just fine?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. Mrs. Drew?
Hey there, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here this evening. The time is 6 p.m., and this meeting is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum, and the meeting has been duly called, and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. Please rise for the pledges of allegiance and remain standing for the silent invocation.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag.
I pledge allegiance
To thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
Please remain standing for our silent invocation. You may be seated. All right, here comes the best part of our meeting. That will be our recognitions. Mrs. Sofer. Thank you, Mrs. Sofer. We are now going to move on to our audience items. We have one speaker this evening. L. Prince, please walk to the microphone whenever you can. You will have 3 minutes. Once your time is up, your microphone will be, actually it will not be muted because we're in person, but you will have 3 minutes. Mr. Rosenthal will give you 30 seconds before your time is up. Begin whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. I have pondered several questions between June and now, and although I won't get answers, I'm going to posit a few of those questions to you all. The first question is, why are syllabi not used in all elementary and secondary schools within Fort Bend ISD? Students should have an idea of what to expect and when to expect it during a term or a semester. The district is undergoing many changes that could get fortified with such fail-safes. For example, if technology fails or a student is stuck at home when their parents, for example, if technology fails or a student is stuck at home, then their parents would have an idea of how to steer them to prevent falling behind. Parents could use whatever resources available at home to supplement. A syllabus could get loaded into your selected learning platform, posted on the teacher web pages for the schools, or emailed to the parents. In the same vein, I still question why the district doesn't use whichever textbooks are available as a fail-safe for the unexpected. With a more detailed syllabus or curriculum syllabus, the text could get aligned to textbooks, and kids would already have it if the teacher is absent or quarantined, or if technology fails. Students and parents would already have that information to see that for the week of November 9th, pages 100 through 110 of the math textbook aligns with what the teachers had planned. So if the student does that work at home during a technology outage or weather cancellation or quarantine, then they're probably less likely to get behind. Somewhere in this district should already exist a list of required texts for each grade, as well as which sections of textbooks, both online and paper, cover those standards. My third question is from my musings last June, and the same question that I posed to 2 administrators before the first day of school, which is, why can't the students credit out by taking tests and quizzes up front? I happen to believe that about 20% of students are above current grade level. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have confidence in the students and think that they could credit out, freeing up the in-building space and decreasing screen time. Presumably, the students get promoted to the next grade level at the end of the school year after completing independent studies that could get designed to provide practice for all their core subjects, or just a passion project or series of smaller projects for those that don't need the grade level practice for the school year. In that way, the district wouldn't lose funding because kids are still attending like under SAAH, albeit reimagined. The kids would have an opportunity to learn, and building space and bandwidth are not occupied unnecessarily. Thank you to all current board members for your service in Fort Bend ISD, and best wishes to those not returning. Congratulations to the trustee-elects, and I hope you serve all stakeholders well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Appreciate you being here this evening. That is our only speaker, so we're going to move along to 6A1, which is our update on our ongoing efforts to support student learning during COVID. Dr. Dupree.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to begin the presentation and do a significant portion at the beginning, but I'm going to tell you there's a lot. I don't want to rehash and belabor things the board and the community already know, but there are several things I wanted to hit on tonight as we get started. Later on, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Joe Rodriguez, our Chief of Schools, to share a little more detailed information about our transition to Term 3. I want to start, though, by kind of giving a status update about where we are in Term 2. As you know, we are a couple of weeks out from Thanksgiving. I want to preface everything I'm going to say by saying I want to be very careful with the language I use to not give a sunny, rosy picture of how things are going. I want to be honest and authentic, and I want people to know we are still dealing with challenges in Fort Bend ISD, as with any other public school district in Texas and the United States. I want to be very plain spoken about that. So we are seeing some bright spots. There are some great things going on in our organization, but I don't want anyone to hear this report or hear me and think that I'm trying to paint a rosy picture, because many, many people, really our entire organization, are still engaged in a very heavy lift all day, every day, working very, very hard. with challenges to continue educating our kids during this epidemic. So I want to start by saying, now that we're in T2, we're several weeks into it. We still are sitting at about 40%, I think about 37.5% of our students are learning in our buildings. A little over 60% are learning online. We are stabilizing, and I use the ing, we are stabilizing still, because there's just still a few things going on with schedules that we're working out. As I often remind staff and parents, we are attempting to run 2 systems with a staff that is built for 1 system. And I'm very proud of our efforts. I'm proud of our team and the teachers especially, and our campus staff. Everyone on the campus is working so hard to make a difference in the lives of our kids this year. And even though we're finding a place of stability, there is continuous stress on the online teachers who have heavier loads than the face-to-face. Of course, the face-to-face teachers are also bearing all the campus duties and the social distancing and all the things that are required to maintain health and security, safety on our campus. So all teachers are carrying a heavy load. Elementary outclass teachers are carrying an exceptionally heavy load because they're serving hundreds of students with little assistance. Our CTE teachers, fine arts, other singleton teachers like unique AP courses, those kinds of things are also very stretched, very thin. And so we heard that a great deal from teachers during recent feedback sessions, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a minute. We are continuing to seek solutions to mitigate the burden on these staff, but they're doing a yeoman's job of serving kids even under pressure. There's stress on campus staff like attendance clerks because we're taking attendance synchronously and asynchronously. And so there's constant changing and movement of attendance based on whether a child attends face-to-face, whether they attend synchronously, whether they participate asynchronously. So there's just lots of pressure, but they're staying the course, keeping up with the data, doing their very best every day. We hit a major milestone on Saturday when our technology department completed cross-listing. That's a technical term for what's going on in the Schoology system that allows the teachers to be able to see multiple courses aligned as one course, which makes their job much easier because now they, for example, an ELA teacher who teaches 9th grade ELA, they can input their lesson plans one time for multiple courses and all the kids see it and they're working and they can input grades more uniformly, more efficiently. So there's going to be a lot of benefits. The cross-listing was complete and we opened up the ability for them to link classes, which is going to be open for the next 2 weeks. So we've really made a major shift forward in helping the teacher with the teacher's workload by getting that completed. That was delayed somewhat because we had to finish getting all the schedules settled. As you know, that took us quite a bit of time to get the schedule settled, and there's still a little movement, but we're in a good place as of right now. We have taken work off of the plate of many of our campus staff. The teacher appraisal system has been postponed until January. Required PD has been lifted from their plate, where a lot of the work they're doing today is counted as PD, and so they're not having to do the formal PD they normally have to do. And we've adjusted the number of grades that teachers we're asking them to do with the kiddos. We do have concerns about student performance. This is the thing that probably came out the strongest during the listening sessions, which I did call office hours with teachers over the last several weeks. There were a lot of concerns about student performance. At the end of T1, failure rates were somewhat high. We talked about this during the last board meeting, and we're going to be back in December with more detail about our response on how we're dealing with it. But we're very concerned, and a lot of the theme came from the fact that teachers reported many students who are online students are not showing up for synchronous classes. They're going on Schoology asynchronously and doing some work and again counting present, but they're not listening, they're not showing up for the teacher lesson. Or they're coming for that and not doing the asynchronous work and turning it in. So we're really challenged, and the teachers are asking for support with that. They're doing everything they know to do to engage the students. So we're looking very critically at our attendance taking mechanisms to see if there's something we need to shift in how we take attendance. And we're trying to look, what I have told staff, we're looking for carrots and sticks to incentivize and motivate students to fully engage in their education, to own their education. We're also looking at ways that we can engage parents to have a higher degree of engagement and accountability in their child's education as well. I was talking to a teacher the other day who had an occasion where he was talking to a mom as she walked into the door at 9 a.m. after working all night, and her son was logging into class about an hour and a half late as mom walked in the door. And he said that had been the pattern, and by talking to mom, they both realized the son was getting up and logging on as mom walked in the door every day. And there was no accountability while she was working hard to serve the needs of their family. So that was a great conversation. And I asked him, did you hear that conversation with the son and the mom? He goes, I heard how it began. And so you can imagine there's a lot going on and those kinds of things. So we're really looking for ways to better engage, more effectively engage students and parents. Our curriculum department has put together plans for what they call grade repair. That's going to help support teachers with clear systems to help students make up lost learning. We've also done a significant curriculum review and looking for ways to support teachers in moving through the curriculum. There's two specific things teachers expressed to me that had to do with closing the gaps from last year. They want to know how to better teach the curriculum that the students missed last year. That's a major concern at all schools in the district. They're also very concerned about the pacing, the differences that exist between online and face-to-face students, and concerns that maybe the online teachers are struggling to use the asynchronous time in the most efficient and effective way possible. So we're looking at ways to beef up our curriculum resources in academic affairs to support teachers to the best of our ability. We're also considering how to give them more planning time. That was a major concern that emerged from teachers as well, as they need more planning time. Some of that is addressed in the calendar proposal changes that are on the agenda tonight. I've mentioned attendance taking adjustments. So we are changing the semester exam at the secondary level so that it's not going to be a cumulative first semester exam. It's going to be a term 2 exam, a cumulative exam only over T2. In regard to contact tracing and positive cases, it's taken a significant amount of time to get the systems in place and to refine the systems for contact tracing. It's an extensive and a thorough process that has created some degree of frustration because it does take time, but it is the right system in place to protect our learning environment. We're getting a lot of questions from parents and staff about it, and we do see it as a long-term system because we believe we're going to be dealing with this for some time to come. But I feel good about where we are today. Last week, we spent basically all of Thursday working through some major issues that had emerged, and I think our staff is working very hard to deliver on that, to close communication gaps that existed about the idea of who knows what when. Some of our teachers were feeling like maybe they had children in their rooms who had been exposed and exposed them, but they weren't being told about the outcomes of their contact tracing. So we're trying to close all of those gaps. We're also, I will tell you, we're partnering with the county. And so some of the concerns, and this is not to scapegoat or blame, but some of the concerns we've heard from parents and staff about getting clearance to return to the building are because the cases that are diagnosed go ultimately to the county for review as well. So often we have to get a clearance back from the county after they've done the community contact tracing to be able to admit students back into school. We do believe our mitigation efforts are serving the district well, and I want to reinforce that because we are very tight on wearing masks, social distancing, the cleaning efforts, the wellness screening. Our staff is doing a remarkable job, and our students have learned how to do these things, and I'm very proud of our efforts here. And we do believe in many ways we're helping to prevent community spread through what we're doing in schools. This was really evidenced during the last few weeks as we've dealt with an issue at one of our high schools where a lot of kids went to one party in the community, and we have spent the little better part of the last week diagnosing a number of cases that are clearly related to that one event, that one party, among students on one team, on two different teams in the school. So we're going to continue to reinforce our messaging about how important it is to take all of these things, the social distancing, the mask, and the cleaning, seriously at school and away from school. Because what happens outside of school for our students and our staff does affect what happens in our school. And we're desperate is the wrong word, we are diligently determined in trying to keep our schools open for face-to-face learning. I am not interested in closing down and doing virtual as a district or on a school level unless it's absolutely necessary. But to keep that going, to keep our kids in the building learning, we have to have everybody taking very seriously our health and safety protocols while they're at school and while they're not at school. We have continued to see an increase of positive cases, what we're calling clusters. It's not spread, and that's a very distinct term. And it's resulting in heightened concern, and our parents are asking more about that. We are tracking data. We're reporting it regularly online as cases come up. We're sharing that with the local community. But extensive contact tracing efforts indicates there are many external factors, as I've mentioned, that are beyond our control that are leading to increased numbers, such as social interactions and engagements where mitigation efforts are not being followed. Through conversations taking place during our process, during our contact tracing, we're learning more and more about who was in close contact with positive cases so that out of abundance of caution, we transition them home to quarantine. And so that's happening quite a bit. I think that's one of the most important things we're doing. And there's questions about why are people going home when they're not sick, they're not symptomatic. But I think we have to take this very seriously if we're gonna protect those who are running our schools and learning in our schools. The very few staff and students who come into close contact with a positive COVID case become positive themselves, which tells us that what we're doing is containing clusters and spread in our community. Another issue we've been dealing with, and it's a very real concern, is transitioning teaching and learning when quarantining. That can be very complex based on the student schedule, based on the teacher, if the teacher's also quarantined, how many students are involved. And we've had some breakdowns in systems in this area that we are working to refine and tighten up. The consistent message is that any student, any teacher should be prepared to begin learning from home on an overnight notice, really. And so there's been, again, in a large organization like ours, it is challenging. We've got some good systems in place, but to get them thoroughly embedded, something we've never had to do before, all the way down through the principal, the campus, the teacher level has been very challenging. And again, that's not to place blame. It's just everyone is already so busy and overwhelmed right now. To try to get that ingrained is also very challenging. So our staff is working, and we're going to continue to focus on making sure our students are learning, whether they're in the regular environment or whether they're quarantined. So that's kind of where we are. That's a status update on where we are today. Stable, moving forward in a healthy way, still working out some kinks around some key areas, but in a good place overall. Term 3 starts in January. That timeline is set right now, as you know. Well, hold on, let me go back before I get to term 3. As I get into term 3, I do want to I've told the board this, but I want to reiterate that over the last 3 weeks, I have personally visited with counselors, every counselor in Zoom meetings where has had an opportunity to talk to me, every principal in face-to-face meetings, and every teacher had an opportunity to participate in a Zoom meeting. And we had hundreds and hundreds of teachers come. We spent hours listening, talking, great conversations, great solutions they presented. It was one of the most uplifting things I've done in a very long time, honestly, because I heard their passion, I heard their dedication, their commitment to the work and to the kids, and I also heard their frustrations and anger at some points about some things and how some things have gone. But overall, we've gotten a great deal of credit, if you will, for making that effort. And what you're seeing as we plan for term 3 is it reflects everything we have heard from all of these groups. We've also had we have a few more meetings to do with people like nurses that were inadvertently left off of the initial list. So I'm going to be meeting with them in the next week or so. We've talked to central office folks. We're going to be doing a few more meetings. And actually, this is going to become a part of our regular fabric of our feedback because it's been very, very valuable. But as we plan for Team T3, the common theme that emerged was stability. Keep things stable. That's what was asked of us from all levels. They don't want any more change. So at this point, as you probably know, we have opened up the window for parents to do a change request for learning model. That window closes on Thursday, and it's going to be a firm close. That was one of the biggest issues that we got feedback on, was allowing parents to continue to make change requests even while we were trying to build schedules. That created lots of problems. So we're going to be a tight close on the 12th. Anybody who calls after that will go on a wait list for consideration later in January after we start the new semester. We've been very public about that. We're scheduled right now to get that by the 12th. At the same time, our campuses are going to have their building utilization schedules, and they're going to have their teacher list of who's going to be out on accommodations and who is not. So they're going to have everything they need come this Friday the 13th to get started, and the goal is to have everything done by December 18th as we walk out the door for winter break. That will enable the technology systems to run in the background while the district is closed for 2 weeks, to allow all the schedules to be set when everybody walks back in the door in January. We've also, in the calendar revision we proposed for approval tonight, it includes a few extra days in January to allow teachers, technology, and campus staff to prepare for the students in case there's any glitches, and just teacher planning to get their lessons together and get ready to greet students for the second semester. As of this morning at 7 a.m., we had 257 requests district-wide to shift from the face-to-face to the online environment. That's district-wide, 257. We had 1,754 requests district-wide to move from online to face-to-face. 417 at the high school level, 483 at the middle school, and 854 at the elementary. Ridgepoint and Bush had the highest numbers, Ridgepoint had about 75 wanting to move face-to-face. And the interesting thing, Bush actually had kind of a net push. They had about 58 wanting to go into the face-to-face, but then they also had about 38 going from face-to-face back online. So there's a net of 20, but those are the two highest high schools. Everybody else was in a much lower range. At the middle school, Thornton, Bowie, and Baines are the highest, with about 45 at each of the three of those. So none of these numbers yet are staggering. They're in the 40s or 50s, so that's a healthy number that we can work with. At the elementary, Commonwealth, Leonetti, Sienna Crossing, and Sullivan are the highest, but again, most of those are in the high 30s and 40s. So nothing major in any of those yet. So, they've got 3 more days. It's going to close Thursday, but they have had the weekend. And so we had a lot of activity yesterday, and we'll see. We believe at this point, most people who want to change have clicked the button to show that. They were ready for that. We'll see. I'm sure there'll be more. But it will be interesting to see if that doubles or triples. But even if it does, that's very manageable as an organization. It's not tens of thousands yet, and we'll see if that manifests over the next few days. So that's where we are on those transitions. Part of our stability measure is limited changes to health and safety. We are making a minor change. We're shifting away from what we previously documented as 45 square foot per student in the classroom to 6 feet when appropriate. So I've been very careful to tell our teachers, we are not going to load up a bunch of kids in your room. We're going to maintain that 6 feet when possible to the full extent. Sometimes we might have to squeeze 1 or 2 more in based on the need, but we're not going to just start loading things up into big numbers in the rooms. I want the teachers to make sure that they feel protected and that they see evidence of that in their room. Transportation, to continue to serve any student who needs and wants transportation. We're going to continue 1 per seat, but we are opening that up that we will possibly have 2 per seat where needed, and all the students are wearing masks. So we're going to maintain that. If we get to the point where we fill every bus completely, it may be possible to decline some students, but that is not in the foreseeable future. That's a little further down the road, but we've been very careful to let some parents know we may not be able to serve all students with transportation based on the numbers that requested. We're continuing with masks at all grade levels and all staff. We're adding in scheduled breaks, and we're considering how to best, if there's a way to reopen the playground use, if there's a way to clean them and keep those safe, but that's not finalized yet. But as you can see, there's very few changes. One of the big topics that came out from our teachers and this is kind of where I'm leading into now, you know, the feedback from teachers and principals came to communication, which we are remedying now. We have really started meeting with our principals on a more consistent basis. I think they're very happy with that. And I think we're making good progress. Everybody across the board said align the schedules. That was a common theme that a lot of people expressed. But the people who have to do that work, the principals and the counselors, said, if it means we have to go through what we just went through, then leave it as it is and make the incremental changes. We cannot do what we just did. We can't do that again. And so at this point, we are not changing the schedules. We're going to keep them as they are. And I think, again, the numbers are bearing out. It's probably, it should be a smooth transition if everything remains somewhat stable at this point. They all mentioned that. The other thing that we spent a lot of time on in the feedback groups was the staff accommodations. There was concern expressed from a lot of face-to-face teachers that it didn't seem fair that we had teachers online, that were online teachers working and getting done at 2:30 in the afternoon. At the same time, the online teachers were saying, my class sizes are double many of yours, and I'm working to grade and plan and deliver instruction in a totally different way. So we've talked to the principals extensively about leadership through that issue, because all the teachers are working hard. Everybody's doing their job. It just looks different, and that's never been something we've dealt with before. So, and I think the principals are leading through that well, and I think we've been able to have some good conversation with teachers around that topic. But we are sensitive to equity and parity in the job, and so we're going to continue to look at that. The other big thing that came up, especially elementary, is the online teachers really felt like there was not enough time on instruction for ELA in particular, for reading, especially the primary grades, those kindergarten and first grade babies that they said they're losing the time to really teach them. So we're looking seriously at extending the synchronous learning time. We're not there yet, but when we come back on the December 7th, we'll be able to talk about that a little bit more, because we believe that we're going to have to do something to give the teachers more time on task. And back to what I said earlier, to engage the kids in a required way, to be counted present perhaps, to get them to engage in that learning. The other thing that came up extensively was PLC. Teachers want planning time, they need planning time, so we've talked about that, about the proposed calendar. Again, tonight that will allow some of that. Really, I've hit on all the big issues. I think there was just lots of interesting things that came up from the teachers, and really a lot of possible solutions to issues. Those were the big rocks that we heard from the teachers and from the principals. So with that kind of concludes kind of where I'm at on T2 and T3. I'm going to let Joe kind of take over from here and finish out the report. Joe?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Dupree. I don't know if Gary can put the slide deck back up to campus logistics planning, but I'm going to go ahead and get started. So as Dr. Dupree mentioned, the learning model change request began last Thursday on November 5th and is going to conclude this Thursday. Dr. Dupree shared some numbers, and in there he shared that there's been 257 requests to move from face-to-face to online, and 1,754 requests to move from online to face-to-face. You know, that total is 2,011. And when you compare that to our student enrollment, that's 2.62% of our student enrollment. Now, that's going to impact the next topic, which is campus capacity. And currently what we're doing is we're analyzing the building capacity. We have members of our design team that are engaged in that process currently. And beginning on Thursday night, principals are actually going to have the opportunity to look at how many learning model changes have occurred for their campus, and that's going to have an impact on them and how they assess their specific campus. So principals will be waiting for that information once we finalize on Thursday night. For the master schedule, our master schedule timeline is underway, and our Term 2 transition is all but complete. At this point, we've completed schedule changes, we've completed cross-listing, and we're in the process of linking classes. That process is ongoing, and I know you see a timeline of November 6th through the 12th. We've had to make some adjustments, so that timeline now is November 7th through the 16th. We still anticipate to be completed before Thanksgiving, so we feel we are in good shape. Now, with that being said, we still have one campus working to finalize schedules, but we've deployed a district team to provide assistance and to continue work towards that completion. Dr. Dupree mentioned feedback, and we've received a lot of feedback from our campus principals, our associate principals, and our counselors, all regarding the master schedule process. Several changes and adjustments are being implemented for Term 3 in 3 key areas. Those areas are training and support structures, cross-entity systems, and timeline milestones. And specifically, those adjustments are having a refined and revised master schedule guidelines, streamlined communication for our campus leaders, a centralized secondary cross-entity process, earlier initiation of cross-entity processes in the timeline for Term 3, and refinement of reoccurring Skyward reports. These reports would assist our campus leaders as they go through the master schedule development. Now, we do have some support structures to assist with master schedule, and these structures include having district personnel going to campuses and providing support to the different campuses. Now, every campus is different in the amount of support that is required. So with that being said, there are different sized teams. Some teams are extremely small and may have only 2 or 3 individuals assisting campuses, and some of those teams may have up to 10, 11, or 12 individuals assisting campuses. To assist with the organization of the different timelines and the actions that are being requested of our campus leaders, administration has created a playbook. That playbook specifically is just to organize all the information, organize the actions that are required, the timelines, and of course, many of the considerations that are needed for our campus leaders as they're planning their master schedules. When it comes to staffing, we have discussed, we're currently operating in dual learning models. And with dual learning models comes a lot of challenges. And one of the challenges that we have is the need to identify and to hire teachers earlier than usual. At this moment in time, it is critical that we begin having events to identify these teachers and to bring them on board. Now, we anticipate an increase in students attending face-to-face, as we highlighted earlier. But of course, we also have our teachers with accommodations that is creating some difficulty as principals and campus leaders are trying to identify how many teacher positions they will need. Our plan at this moment in time is to over-allocate positions. We are going to hire the best teachers for our students, and we're going to ensure that those teachers participate in the new teacher orientation like every other teacher would participate in. These events are going to assist us as we are looking at teachers that are still requesting accommodations, teachers that are considering retirement, and some of those teachers that are considering to resign from Fort Bend ISD. Unlike many other surrounding districts, we have allowed for staff accommodations related to COVID, and that is unique to Fort Bend ISD. At this moment in time, we're making adjustments to the personnel who will qualify for an accommodation based on medically related conditions. So what we're going to do as a district is we're going to implement a recertification process, and that process is going to include a series of questions that's going to provide the information for us to determine if the employee can continue to qualify for an accommodation. As of Friday, the HR team has received documentation from 14 employees for recertification, and 5 of those are teachers. And these employees are seeking recertification for an employee medical or caregiving need. Now, last communication began 2 weeks ago for all employees who received an accommodation that was not medically related. So that way they could prepare for reentry into the workplace beginning in January. On Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, HR is going to provide a list to district and campus leaders with the employees and when they are scheduled to return. And as of today, from looking at the list, there are 31 employees that have already returned, and 13 of those are teachers. So in addition, there are 30 more teachers that will be returning in January. So right now, we feel like we're on the right track with the fall events. The first event actually is going to begin on Friday. We believe that the system we have in place to hire and to over-allocate is going to provide us with the teacher workforce that we need for our students. And now I will pass it on to Stephanie Williams.
If you don't mind, I think what I'd like to do, Stephanie, before you talk about the calendar, I want to tie a few things back to my part and what Joe said before we move into the calendar. Joe mentioned the building utilization, and I wanted to speak to that because I know that is a concern to some parents about what's going to happen, because we already have some campuses that are at almost capacity with face-to-face. So we are looking at options, like using every available space in a building, portable buildings. If it comes down to it, at a high school, we might have to do a hybrid where kids come some days and they learn from home on other days. At the other grade levels where hybrid is not an option per TEA, we might have to ask students to go to a different school temporarily, and I want to be real careful about that, temporarily to learn. If that becomes the case, those parents will have the opportunity to accept or decline that opportunity, go or continue online. You know, we won't just make them do that, of course, but just know there's a lot of things we're going to do before we start sending kids to other campuses. The other thing that I want to speak to is you heard me talk a lot about feedback and about staff feedback. We did not conduct a formal parent survey to gain feedback, but we have received hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of Let's Talks and emails and social media from parents over the last several months. We went back and analyzed all of that to kind of get themes and concerns that were expressed by parents. We are, in the near future, going to be getting more, we're going to be going formally to parents to get feedback about how things are going in the learning environment for their children and their family. So we're not leaving parents out of this, but we just frankly, we were running on a very short timeline to get ready for T3, that we just didn't have time. So we really spent the time on looking at authentically what parents have been saying to us for the last 2 months. And I think that it was very useful information. The last thing I wanted to touch on is everybody is probably read in the paper by now that last Thursday, the Commissioner of Education announced an option that we're now authorized to require some students to return to face-to-face learning. And if they decline that directive or that offer, then we can stop serving them. So that was just announced last Thursday on the Commissioner's call with superintendents. We're looking at what is involved in that, but it's not something we've even entertained, or I'm not sure we will entertain in Fort Bend ISD, honestly. Because what it would mean in the end is demanding that a kid return face-to-face in kind of defiance of their parents' wishes for their well-being. So we're going to have a conversation about that before we get too far down, before it gets too much further down the road. But just know it is on our radar, but it's not something that we have had time to explore yet because it's still brand new information to us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie Williams to talk about the calendar. Stephanie.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. As you all know, we brought a modified school year 2021 calendar in July for review, and the Board of Trustees approved that calendar, which adjusted the school start date and provided additional time at the beginning of the school year for teachers to plan and prepare for instruction. On the screen.
We need the presentation back on the screen, please, Gary. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I had a technical difficulty. I'll be right back up.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you. In just a minute on the screen, you'll see a version of the proposed calendar for tonight. We did reconvene at the calendar committee, and we looked at the question, to what degree was the school calendar serving the objectives this year? And 2 key areas were identified where additional time might serve us well. One of those, as Dr. Dupree has already referenced, is additional time for professional learning, tied directly to planning and development of course materials for our teachers. That was across the board, elementary, middle, and secondary, and asked. And then the second thing is time for transition in order to allow for technology system readiness as part of the transition after parents may indicate a change in their learning model. So what you're looking at here is the proposed instructional calendar. What you'll notice in this instructional calendar is that the spring semester still ends on the same dates here on December 18th. What you'll see in January is on January 5th, we've added a professional learning day for teachers, and so that gives them 1.5 days plus a half-day workday before students would return on January 7th. That does change the student return date by 1 day in January. And then if you'll notice in February, the February professional learning day was transitioned to a student day. That day was moved to, if you go down to March, you'll notice 3 days of transition, March 22nd through 24th. These transition days tied with spring break will support technology system readiness, while also on March 25th and 26th, allowing 2 professional learning days for teachers to transition with any students and also plan for instruction for the 4th grading period. Students would be out of school for 2 weeks, March 15th through 19th as a planned spring break, and March 22nd through 26th as part of a transition week. This time could be utilized for student intervention for students where the need is determined. This also shifts the last student day in June to June 3rd and the last teacher day in June to June 4th. This does maintain teachers on a contract of 187 days while allowing the additional planning and time for transition between grading periods. This is the proposed calendar for tonight, and if approved, we would follow up with the system changes that are necessary to enact this calendar. Next slide, please. I believe that concludes our presentation, and we can open for questions. Thank you.
I want to clarify one thing, and Stephanie, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to be, because I know a lot of teachers are listening tonight. Stephanie mentioned a number of professional learning, professional development days. This year, what that means for us is professional learning communities. It does not mean district directed and mandated sit and get new knowledge. It is really time for teachers to engage with one another in their work with student data, with lesson planning, to really do the learning and the development they need to do their job best. So this is really designed to support teachers in the best way possible without being top-down driven from the district. So I just want to make sure that it's very clear for any teacher that's listening to the conversation this evening. So with that, we're happy to hear any questions or express conversation with the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. I wanted to thank everyone for the presentation as well. We're going to start off with Mr. Dave Rosenthal.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate a lot of your comments, Dr. Dupree. I do have one question as I was reading through a lot of this stuff, and when we talked about utilization and capacity. So what would happen in a situation if, say, a high school could not handle the number of kids that want to come back? I know we talked about cap and overflow and things like that, or hybrid. Do you think that it's possible that part of the reason where we might not have capacity would be because we have some online students who are coming to campus for an extracurricular class or whatever? Is that a possibility? Because if that is, then I think there's another decision point to make, because if kids are committed to coming face to face, and that's going to force a kid to either go to another campus or do a hybrid, then I think that needs to be thought out. So
I think that's a good point. That's not something that's been on my radar, but the numbers are not high with the number of students who are doing that, but I would agree that if you've got a fine arts class, for example, that a child is doing that, it might be necessary to close that option to serve the needs of the face-to-face children who might otherwise be forced out. So I think we can definitely put that on our list of our work list to explore that deeply before we
Yeah,
close
just something
the
to
door.
consider, and obviously, people that know me know that I'm not anti-fine arts by any means. So, it's just something that I could see maybe being an issue, so, something to look out for. The other thing, what are some of the biggest pushbacks on the current proposed calendar that you've heard?
Stephanie, can you mention what you've heard from the committee, or otherwise? I have honestly, Mr. Rosenthal, not gotten much information. We got a few emails.
I got one email today.
Yeah. Hey, Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about the committee's conversation?
Yes, sir. The biggest pushback, Mr. Rosenthal, was related to the date that we ended school. There was significant concern related to going any deeper in June than June the 4th. So we had two versions that we took to the calendar committee. The other version that they looked at, I believe, had students ending on the 8th or the 9th. It was a little bit deeper into June, and there was concern related to those seniors who might have college, the camps that occur in the summer, and then also to shortening the summer or the break that many of our teachers might have. So that was the biggest level of pushback, and why the committee, one of the reasons why the committee went with this version of the calendar.
Okay, because I think, Charles, I think you had put out a couple weeks ago in a memo or in an update or something where there was some talk about actually extending it deeper. I think you maybe even put a date that was deeper than the 8th at one point. But
Yes, our preliminary conversations were going
like the
even to the
15th or
15th.
something. Yeah, I
Yes.
remember reading that. So, okay, so I think obviously this is much better. And typically what school would have say if there was, I mean, the original calendar before COVID, right? What was that original date?
The last day for students, Mr. Rosenthal, was May 26th with the teacher workday on May 27th.
Okay, so that's when 2021 was planned out. That was the original, okay. So,
Yes, sir.
I mean, considering everything, you're pushing it back a week and you're giving teachers a little extra time to, which sounds like what they're asking for. So I'm hoping that there's not too much pushback on that part. So the other thing, I'm actually a little surprised by the numbers so far of coming back face to face. I actually thought they'd be a little higher. But you mentioned something about some kind of TEA mandate that you can actually force kids to come back. Where did they come up with that? I mean, what was their thought? Because kids aren't engaging, or?
I think they see it as a tool to use, because like I've mentioned, statewide, there's issues with performance, student achievement, and students not engaging. So I think they see it as a tool they're giving districts to leverage, basically say, get them back in the face-to-face, or we're not going to be responsible for them.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. Tolsan?
Thank you. So I'm going to just follow up first off on the hybrid versus move to another campus. Doesn't it depend on the level of, at the high school level, we can implement a hybrid schedule.
Yes, ma'am.
We
only
don't
at
have
the
to
high school.
we don't have to send kids to other campuses at the high school level.
That's correct.
Okay, because I just wanted to make perfectly clear before parents start really getting concerned about that. But it's the elementary level where we can't implement a hybrid schedule,
And the middle school.
and the middle school level
Yes, ma'am.
where we can't implement a hybrid. Okay.
I do plan to, if we get, depending on the final data, we may make an appeal if necessary to TEA for middle school.
I appreciate that. I think that's a great idea because especially under the circumstances of full online versus, being able to implement a hybrid, certainly the hybrid would be more, more beneficial, I think, for our students. So as a parent who has a student who is online but going face-to-face for fine arts, I completely understand that if we were to have to send kids to other campuses, that you would have to close that. But it would be disappointing to have to do that, mainly because those halls are the reason you're probably not getting any concerns about it is those halls are usually plenty big enough. They're also practicing outside right now, at least for band. The choirs I know have been very creative with things, so certainly hate to see that happen at the middle school level, so that's good. I'll start backwards. So the calendar, I had some of the same questions Mr. Rosenthal had. I was really glad to see we only went a week in. I think it should have been predictable to most parents and families that we were going to have to extend the school year at least some. We've got large gaps, as you just talked about. Student achievement is a concern, so I'm in favor of putting some of those intervention days in there and giving them some more class time and giving the teachers the ability to work on closing some of those gaps and planning for that. So I'll just say that at the outset. I was really glad and want to thank you, Dr. Dupree, and Dr. Rodriguez, and Ms. Saavedra, and everyone else who's gotten feedback from the principals and the teachers and the counselors. Was really glad to hear that you're gonna sit down with nurses. I was gonna ask that question, so we can't leave the nurses out. They've had to manage quite a bit with kids going back face to face. I said this at a previous board meeting and would reiterate that I really think it's important in the future to sit down with these stakeholders before we do the planning next time. I think that one of the things you said is that the teachers had solutions to issues and the principals had solutions to issues. And I continue to feel like that if we would have brought them in on the front end, that they probably could have done some troubleshooting for us, and could have given some guidance on what we think is going to work and what's not. I've been beating the drum for aligning schedules for a few board meetings, and that was the feedback we got, is that that would have made life a lot easier. And I wish we could go back and maybe bring them in and listen to them, and try to make those, before we went out and implemented something, to try to make those plans. I'm really glad we're doing it now, and I think it is going to help for a smoother T3. But I really just feel like I need to say that I think it would have helped us plan a little bit better if we would have done that on the front end. The principals especially, they know what's going to work on their campuses and what's not. And, our teachers know. I mean, we had Mr. Edkins come in and present a plan. They know what's going to happen, what's going to work for their students and what isn't. And I just think it's important to keep that in mind for next time. And lastly, I had a question about transportation. So, and I think you may have answered this, so I apologize if I missed it. But transportation is part of the response whenever you decide to go back face to face. Is that or to change your learning model?
Yes, you'll recall last time we had a disconnect for some of that. This time when they made their decision, right now when they're making the decision, transportation is part of that.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that
Yes.
we're thinking about that. And then lastly, I too, and I know with my colleagues, we've received those hundreds of parent emails over the last few weeks. And so I was glad to hear you say that we're not ignoring the parent feedback. And I think it's a good idea when you're collecting the feedback in T3 before we go to T4. Those parent emails came through loud and clear, and it's clear, it's obvious that that's been taken into consideration as we plan going forward. So I just wanted to say that and say thank you. That is all.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mrs. Grail James.
Thank you, Mr. Verdeen, and good to see everybody tonight. I had a number of questions that have already been asked, but I have a couple more clarifications to ask. And one is, the first one I'll ask is on the calendar. The week that's after spring break, is that a student learning week, or is that a student holiday and or student intervention time? I was trying to gather. understand.
Ms. James, that is a student holiday, which could be used for intervention just as other holidays or breaks on Saturdays are for students that are in need, but it is a designated student holiday.
And it might be good to,
Okay.
let me, Mrs. James, clarify that as well. What that means is, as we get further down the road with planning, we may work with schools and ask them to identify kids who may need to show up that week. If we do that, it would mean teachers would be paid for that time over and above their current contract. Because those are holidays for teachers as well right now. So it would be, I want any teacher listening to understand that means we would set up an arrangement to compensate them for time that they would work that week.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. I like this concept of the transitions built in here, and I think for the well-being of the staff, it's going to be really important to have that, especially if there are schedule changes and for their planning needs. So thank you for that answer, and thank you, Dr. Dupree, for that clarification. Then I had a question with regard to, Dr. Rodriguez was talking about staffing and some hiring that was going on. He was using the phrase over-allocated positions. I don't know what that means. And are we hiring more teachers? Are we helping relieve some of the burden through hiring? Can someone please clarify what's that?
Yes, ma'am. That is our goal. When we talk about over allocating, what it means is you might give a campus more teachers than they need based on the basic teacher assignment that's calculated. So in this case, we've got positions that we can use. So it's not adding new positions. It just means they may not be currently assigned to that particular school who has the need. So we would be over allocating to meet the current need this year and would adjust it further down the road as we plan for future years. So yes, that at this point that would be included in the budget that's already here. They're positions that are available for use, but that we may need to use them differently than originally intended at a different school.
Okay, well, I think that sounds really good. I think that there's a lot of things we're doing differently this year. There's a lot of changes and there's a lot of reallocation of everything. So I appreciate this, you guys' effort in this, because I hope we can find some quality hires that can help relieve some burden that and help really also to meet the needs of students. I thought I heard you saying that our students aren't performing as well as we would like or as we even maybe expected. And I think I also heard you say that you're going to give us more information about that is it next week or is it next month?
Next month, the December meeting.
Okay, and all right, well, I'm eager to hear about that because I have some concerns of students, about how students are doing, and I've heard rumors of high failure rates. I've heard rumors of just difficulty with engagement and especially for the online students. So I'm curious to know how that's going. I'm curious to know if we have locations where it's going well and how we can learn from the places where it's going well, and maybe places where it's not going very well, if there's lessons that we can learn from that as well. And I'm also interested to know, it sounded as if Dr. Dupree, and I appreciate you and staff taking, it sounds like, a tremendous amount of time to interview, talk with, Zoom meetings, et cetera, with staff to get feedback. And as Mrs. Tossan said, I think that's really, really important because they're the ones that are actually putting the rubber to the road. And as we've said many times, teaching and learning is really a face-to-face activity. It requires engagement and relationships between teachers and students. And so they're the teachers, the people that are on the front lines, the nurses in dealing with their health care, the principals in dealing with building management. All those people have the frontline seat to know what's going on. And I appreciate you making the effort to do that. And I hope that, and maybe you could tell us about how we're communicating best practices. What have we updated the back to school planning book? What have we done to get the best practices out there?
I would, if, Mrs. James, are you finished?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I was going to respond just briefly to two things you said. One, I want to be very clear because you're generous in the way you talked about hearing rumors about student high failure rates and student performance, but it's well documented. And so that's one of our greatest concerns right now. And so when we come back in December, we're going to be sharing solutions as well as exemplars of where it's going well and everything you've just described. So I appreciate your drawing our attention back to that. The other thing I wanted to tune into that we have not spoken of this evening when you talked about teaching, the teachers, is one of the bigger issues that came up from staff during the feedback sessions is the lack of substitute teachers. Because we have just a void of substitutes willing to come into the face-to-face environment. And so that creates a very unique situation, whereas before we might ask teachers to cover, or we might ask, combine classes and do things. We can't do all that right now with social distancing in our system. So that is another major issue that teachers and campus staff are carrying, is the burden of how to handle when teachers are out right now. So just know, if anyone's listening and wants to come and sub, we need substitute teachers in the face-to-face environment. We're constantly got that pool open, trying to get people to sign up to come and do that. So we'll even take volunteers of school board members who might be certified teachers willing to come in. We can't pay you, but you're welcome to come on in and volunteer some time.
Show me the money.
So anyway, thank you. I just wanted to insert that as well, Mr. President.
Okay, that sounded, I have one more comment. That sounded a little bit like an advertisement. So that was really good. Can you also add to I think this may be on the list already, but the report for next month, are you going to be discussing attendance and attendance trends and mitigation efforts on attendance?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my comments and questions.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mrs. Helliger.
So I'm gonna start off by saying I think Dave is willing to do some substitute teaching in math and science. But anyway, so a lot of people have already made some of the comments that I wanted to make, but I wanted to emphasize Ms. Tassan's statement that she made earlier, because it's real. We are here today, and I remember one of the meetings, Kristen asked what she asked. Some of us, followed back up with that, and then we even talked about pivoting, knowing when to pivot, when the right time is to pivot for the modalities that we're working in right now. So I guess I wanted to ask, is there any expectation for the 2020-21 school year that we would have any alignment of the school?
You're talking about for the remainder of this school year?
Yeah.
No, ma'am, not at this point.
Okay. So we are going to make incremental changes throughout the rest of the school term, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then when we look at 2021, 2022 school year, well, hopefully by springtime, we're starting to plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
We would have enough time
to align schedules and communicate early on in the summer what parents should be expecting? Because that will be my
Oh,
expectation.
yes.
Okay.
And that won't be early summer, that will be April, May. It'll be before the end of this school year.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Okay. Thank you. And then I do have another question around the curriculums, the master schedule for the schools. And I know Dr. Rodriguez talked about having, I guess, support teams for the different schools. Will there be, or did we, maybe we didn't, but will there be a, I'll call it quality check that has to go through, every schedule has to go through somebody to say, this is it? Because I think we got ourselves into a situation with one of the schools, I don't know how, but it sounded like maybe the schools had autonomy to kind of make their own schedules based on the guidelines that we gave them, right?
Yes.
And so I think we might need to do a quality check and just that second check that says, I don't know if it's Dr. Rodriguez or whatnot, that says, before we say this is it, everyone has checked this schedule and we know this is the right thing for us to do.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that was one of the biggest, again, through the feedback loop, what we determined is we really need milestone touch points. It can't be go work on it for 3 or 4 weeks and then come back and we're going to check it. We're going to have probably weekly touch points with campuses to monitor progress and have that degree of accountability. We're trying to leverage a little, kind of back to what the board has mentioned several times, we're trying to leverage empowerment to give the principals the latitude to do their work, but with a regular check-in to say, are you making the progress in accordance with the guidelines we've set? So I think we're going to run this race much differently than we did the first race. We didn't have a good accountability structure in place for the first round, and that did lead to a lot of the issues we're continuing to deal with today.
Okay, that's good. So I think, so the only concern, my last question, everyone's asked a lot of the questions I had about the calendar, but, we received some emails around people who have already made plans around the current schedule, especially ending before the Memorial holiday. How can we accommodate for that, or do we accommodate for that?
Well, I'm going to be honest, and it's going to sound callous, but there's time to adjust summer plans.
Okay.
I mean, they're just going to have to do their best to work with that. And, we typically, if I'm going to be honest, we typically have families sometimes just withdraw their kid a few days before the end of the year anyway, to start a international trip or to go to start a vacation. Families do that. I don't encourage it. I don't like it. But in the end, families are ultimately going to do what they need to do for their family. And our goal is to run a system for all children. So I don't think we can make the decision based on one-off. We've made plans for that week, and if they need to do what they need to do, honestly.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the feedback.
Next, we have Ms. Allison Drew and then Mr. Rice. Go ahead, Allison, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with a question that I believe I already have the answer to, but I want to make sure that I didn't get something wrong. It's regarding the calendar, and my question is, did you have a board member participate on the calendar committee while you were making this decision?
Stephanie?
No, ma'am, we did not have a board member in attendance. We did have a board member on the committee, but not in attendance.
So assuming that I'm that board member, I'm gonna assume that the answer to my next question is completely innocent, but would you be able to explain why there wasn't a board member in attendance for the decisions that were made about the calendar?
Ms. Drew, if you're alluding to anything, I'm not aware of that. I believe that you were invited to that meeting and did not attend that meeting. If that's not true, I would need to be made aware of that.
I definitely will double check my calendar invites, but I don't recall seeing it at all. So I was just thinking that maybe you were being conscious of my time and that I didn't get included. So yeah, that was definitely why I wanted to walk down this road a little bit trepidatiously, because I wanted to make sure that that when we are doing these things, that we are involving board input, that we're not circumventing that process, because some of the things that were coming up as questions might have been input from a board perspective that might have been really helpful to shaping what the final recommendation for a calendar was. So I can double check my calendar and we can both chalk it up to possibly some human error that was unintended, for sure.
Absolutely, Ms. Drew, because you were vital to the support of the first calendar that we brought this year. I honestly felt like you had something else on your plate, but I am going to check that because there were 2 separate invites sent for each week.
And I want to thank you for bringing that to our attention. That'll help us improve our communication efforts in the future as well.
Yes, yes, and I definitely don't want it to seem like that there was anything nefarious that was going on. I just wanted to really check, you know, where the breakdown was and how we could better communicate in the future so that that doesn't happen. And it might very well be on my side. Yeah, so I'm willing to own that if that was the case. Thank you. And I guess you know, everyone has kind of commented and asked questions surrounding things that are extremely important to me. And one of the things that truly is extremely important to me that I want to just add an additional comment upon, and I can say that I'm waiting with bated breath upon, is, you know, next month, really understanding, you know, what has been happening with students that are not doing as well and not achieving the mark, and really looking into how we pivot or how we find ways to include achievement and not kind of, I have a set of, let me just say, I have a set of students that are doing really well in one way, but they may not be doing well in another way. And that is competing with what their overall grade looks like. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we come up with and what we put together in order to show success for our students in the ways that they can be successful in these new learning environments. So that was all I had.
Thank you, Mrs. Drew. Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. I agree with a lot of the questions and the comments that have been raised by my colleagues here, in particular Mrs. Tossan's comments about soliciting input, and that's a big one. And then also Mr. Rosenthal's comments, as we have, my question is related to social distancing as students return face-to-face. So I believe that Mr. Perez has a facility assessment underway, and my question is, do we know how many T buildings we have, and do we know where they are, and do we know what they're being used for? A lot of times a T building gets placed on a campus, and once it's no longer needed, it turns into a storage room, but that can be taken out. And do we know the answer to those questions, Mr. President? If we do, how are we tracking that? That's my question.
Yes, sir, thank you. We do know the answer to that question, and we do have a list of all the portable buildings. In addition, we've developed capacity based on originally the 45 and now on the 6-foot spacing. So we have all of that information for every campus, including spaces that we ask the principals to identify as possible teaching spaces. So one of the things that you may see as we move forward is that it would appear that our buildings have grown because all of a sudden you have, you know, additional space, but the fact is that we're literally looking at instructional pull-out spaces. We're looking at science rooms, we're looking at stages, we're looking at every place that we could actually place students during a time like this and seeing what the capacity of the building is.
Right. Well, and I would understand that. This is an atypical situation where we would need to do that. Are we revalidating, I know that we know the design capacity, are we revalidating the functional capacity of these campuses, which I realize changes from year to year? But if we're going through this effort right now, it would seem like it would be a good idea to do that.
Yes, sir, we're not presently doing it at the moment, but we will be doing that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Thank you all for the questions and comments this evening. I have one simple one, and excuse me if I didn't hear this, but having elementary school students, I was curious, the transition time, I believe is what we've called it. What does that look like for an elementary student?
Do you mean on those days?
Yes, sir.
Well, what that means on the calendar that you're looking at, it means those are extra student holidays.
Okay.
Because that's staff time to make sure everything is working and scheduled properly before the students come back into the building.
Okay, so it's sort of a rhetorical question, but I wanted to make sure that aligned through secondary and elementary.
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay. All right. Thank you, staff, for the presentation. I want to thank all the board members for all their comments and questions. We will now convene in closed session under the Texas Open Meetings Act, Chapter 551, and those sections listed in the agenda, and for the purpose of a private consultation with the board's attorney on any or all subject matters authorized by law. We are now convened in closed session.
Skype? I don't remember his name or what the topic was. Can you send it, I'll go look it up. No, that's what I was thinking then. Yeah, that was, let me see how they, I know, because I talked to the team about it. Let me see what they did. Okay.
Since I always put that on the end of the.
What's his name?
All right, we are now reconvening open session. Moving along to the next part of our agenda this evening is to consider action on closed session items, which we do not have any this evening. So we will move right along to our activity report. Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, sir. This month, board members attended the Board Policy Committee meeting, Student Leadership 101, Session 3, 6th Annual Sugar Shindig Virtual Voting, 6th Annual Sugar Shindig Virtual Event, Pandemic Stakeholder Advisory Committee meetings, the Great Cupcake Chase, Scavenger Hunt, Superintendent's Summative Evaluation, Board Audit Committee meeting, regular business meeting, All-in Mentoring, Blue Ridge Elementary School, Lakeview Elementary School campus visit, Sugar Mill Elementary School campus visit. JB is number 1.
That wasn't very convincing, Mr. Rosenthal. All right. Next, we have our consent agenda. Do we have any items that we'd like to pull this evening from our consent agenda? All right. Hearing none, may I have a motion?
Mr. President, I move to approve the consent agenda in its entirety as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Tossan. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, please vote. Motion passes. All right. Do we have any, where are we moving on to? I'm looking at my thing here, Dr. Dupree.
Future meetings, yes, sir. So, reviewing
Excuse
future
me.
meetings and
I'm sorry, I was just going to make that, we do not have any action items this evening.
Yeah.
Next, Dr. Dupree, can you please review our board meeting agenda items? So-
Yes, this coming Wednesday, November 11th, the board will meet to canvass the November 3rd election results. And on November 16th, there'll be a meeting next week to say goodbye and thank you to our retiring trustees and to swear in and welcome the new trustees. The board will also elect officers next Monday evening. There'll be no other items on the agenda other than board recognitions and swearing in and officer elections. On then December, we're going to be back with a quarterly financial update on the 2021 first quarter. During that discussion, we'll also talk about a potential TRE, tax ratification election for 2021. The first rating hearing is scheduled for December, as well as a student achievement update that you heard us refer to this evening. We're going to be considering board action on the campus and district performance objectives. And then in January, we'll be back to talk about the TAPER, that's the annual Texas Academic Performance Report, and an update on the Early Literacy Center and pre-K expansion, as well as a special education update, and perhaps if a board approval of the 2021 school year calendar. Also, in January 21, the board is planning to schedule a team building workshop for the board.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
This meeting is now adjourned.
Goodbye.